All right, what did everybody think of the second episode of The Ones Who Live? I loved it. There's a lot to talk about, and I'm excited to dive in, so let's just do that. We start on an image of a walker with gas cans, who then gets set on fire. And of course, this is an image that comes up later in the episode, but gas cans, gas stations have been a big symbol throughout the story. We actually did have them in the pilot episode with Rick, but we did see them around Beth's storyline a lot. In season 4, we had them, even though she wasn't there, we had them going to the gas station, when Michonne and Daryl and Bob, when they, were going to find medicine for the virus that was at the prison. And we've seen it a ton of times since then. Like, I couldn't even go through all the time. So it's a big symbol that we've seen a lot, including around Beth's storyline. And I think the main reason for that is that gasoline is always going to be an accelerant of fire. There was a lot of fire in this episode and definitely some callbacks to Beth, but I will get into that in a little bit. So anyway, right off, it starts with a symbol that made me smile and made me really happy. So with Michonne, it starts 6 years after the bridge, which is not too long, about the time really that she left. We see that the people she stopped to help were part of a caravan. That gets explained. They are a caravan of people who is moving north toward New Jersey, and they refuse to stop even when somebody falls behind. So they're okay leaving their own people behind, which obviously does not sit well with her. She meets, I didn't write all their names down. The woman, I think, is Bailey. I can't remember the man's name. And then, of course, the little guy is Nat or Natty. And basically everyone tells her not to go north because there's a huge walker migration right now that she's going to end up running into. But of course, she's determined to go, and they do give her a horse. She asks why they stay with this caravan, who obviously is a little bit toxic and not terribly loyal to their own people, but they end up going back. Of course, we'll see them later on. Now, Michonne is headed toward a place called Bridges Terminal, and I just had to laugh at how on the nose that title is, the location, what it's called. So we've got Bridges, which, see like everything ever written about bridges. Like, it's a huge symbol, especially around Beth. And then Terminal is a throwback to Terminus. And then it ends up being a shipyard on the ocean. So we have that as well. And I just kind of had to laugh. Yep, there it is. There's the symbolism. Okay. So she does run into the walkers, and when she is trying to get through that horde is when we actually see the gas can walker that gets blown up. So it's actually kind of interesting because she is using, I don't even know what you would call that. It's a rocket of some kind that then blows up, kind of reminiscent of a bazooka, but much smaller. And she, shoots it into the crowd of walkers in order to have it blow up and get them to move toward that so that she can get through them. And somehow she manages to hit the only walker that has gasoline on him. So I'm not sure exactly if that is supposed to be symbolism, probably, but I'm not sure exactly what to point to it as, other than here it was definitely a plot element, because then Natty and Bailey and the others come back and save her and help her. In order to save her, there are 2 explosions on each side of the horde that have purple fire, which I thought was interesting. I mean, we've seen the green gas, now we've got this purple fire, but we find out that it was Nat who put that together. He's really good at burning things, and he's really good at building things, including weapons and bombs and that sort of thing. But it was really interesting the way that they showed the walkers sort of part down the middle. It just looked like the Red Sea. I mean, it reminded me of something very, very biblical that is eventually going to let Michonne get through to the, quote unquote promised land where she will find Rick. So I think that was very, very intentional. Also, when Natty showed up, he said, or rather, Bailey told her, Natty said you'd need a beer. So let's talk about Nat for a minute. Nat has major Beth vibes. He is definitely a Beth proxy for so many reasons. I mean, he's a very humane character. He's very grounded. He's somebody who very much cares about how other people feel. He feels things very deeply himself. And there were just so many callbacks to Beth through him. I mean, first of all was the fire. That's, I think, when it clicked for me that he was a Beth character, because he was sitting there messing around with his lighter and kept clicking it on and off. I just kept seeing Beth on the porch grinning and saying, let's burn it down. I mean, Natty's kind of obsessed with fire, and Beth, in her own way, was kind of obsessed with fire. So there's that. Like I said, there's the personality. There's the fact that he was obviously more grounded than most of the other people in that caravan. And he said that he wanted to leave and he should have left a long time ago, which actually might be a foreshadow of her arc if she's with another group that's kind of toxic and, says, I really should have left a long time ago, that sort of thing. And we actually see this as a theme throughout the story. The other thing it reminded me of is Daryl and the Claimers in season 4. He knew they were toxic, he knew they were bad, and he stayed longer than he probably should have just because they were a group and he didn't want to strike out on his own. But staying with them actually led him to Rick and Michonne. And, Natty staying as long as he did led him to Michonne and helping Michonne. So it's kind of like a fate sort of a thing. Like they stayed longer than they ethically knew they should have, but it leads to what happens in the plot. So it's like maybe it's good that they stayed. Anyway, so like I said, it's a theme we've seen before. And let's see, what else? So he's obsessed with fire. He's really good at building things. I actually, in terms of his building stuff prowess, I'm kind of sad that he died. I actually knew that he would because the scene with Rick and Michonne kind of near the end where the helicopters come was one that was leaked. And so I had seen that scene. And in the part that was leaked, we actually do see Nat lying there. So I'd seen him on the trailer and then I noticed him there and I was like, okay, he's going to die, But even so, it made me sad because I really wish that he had been able to meet Eugene. I just think they would have been besties at building stuff together and that would have been super fun, but unfortunately. But back to how Nat is like Beth. He comforted Michonne when she was really upset. That reminded me of, again, early in season 4 when Beth was taking care of Michonne and just saying things like, we care about you. When you love someone, her's part of the package, giving her Judith when Judith was just a baby and Michonne was crying, all of that, it just felt very, very similar. But I think the biggest thing comes right at the end with Nat. I'm kind of skipping ahead just so that I can do his arc and how he's like Beth. He's the one, as it turns out, who brought down Rick's helicopter, which was really, really interesting. I really do feel like that is a foreshadow that something Beth does is going to make the difference in bringing down the CRM. He was really rebellious and wanting to take them down because he hates them for killing his friends. I think that will be true of Beth. And most importantly, he dies at the end, right? He kind of becomes a sacrifice, and he is shot by an unseen shooter very suddenly. Right? Now, I'm not at all saying that I think Nat is really alive and going to come back, and I'm not saying that because he died, I think Beth is really dead. I just think that they used his character, who was always going to be a very minor character just in this one episode, to help Michonne get to Rick. But they were using him as a Beth proxy in a lot of ways, and there's probably even more that I don't know if I've got more in my notes as I'll go along. I might even find a few more. But yeah, that really, really stuck out to me. So he was definitely a Beth proxy, and I really, really liked his character. I thought he was great. All right, so let's go back to chronologically in the episode. When Bailey was telling Michonne about how she's pregnant and how she and her boyfriend ended up out there, she said that he was trying to get her some honey from a big box store. I can't remember if we've actually seen honey as a symbol before, but I think we have seen bees. So it's probably similar, and the big box store reminded me of the big spot. So just kind of some very stagnant, small symbols that are callbacks to things around Beth's arc. Okay, so we had a big deal kind of scene where Michonne is with this caravan. They're traveling through what looks like a town or a city, and they see a helicopter, which then shoots the chlorine gas at them. So anyone who has not seen The World Beyond, this might be the first time you're seeing this, but we definitely saw it in The World Beyond. The CRM is experimenting with chlorine gas on walkers and on people, and they've used it before to kill people. We've seen them do that. So it's not surprising, but yeah, it would be a really horrible experience. And clearly it took her, Michonne, and Nat, who are the only ones who survived, months and months to heal from that. I mean, they're lucky that they survived at all. It really does melt your lungs. It's a chemical agent. We've seen it used in wars and things. So that is basically why it took Michonne so long to find Rick or get back to Alexandria or anything. But they stay there for a while. They do have, they have oxygen. So this was a callback. Michonne went to the medical plaza and got a wagon full of oxygen tanks. So back in season 4, when we saw the episodes, that were specifically about the governor and what happened to him when he left. We have something very, very similar there, where he went to a retirement home and got a bunch of oxygen for Tara's father, but it looked very, very similar. So it's another theme that we've seen actually quite often. When they finally get to Bridger's terminal, there are piles of bodies that have been burned and none of them have shoes on. So clearly that's the doing of the CRM, but Michonne kind of decides that her search for Rick is futile, and maybe he really is dead, and she's very sad about it. That's when Nat comforts her. It's a very sweet scene. But she basically has given up and decides to head back to Alexandria. And she says, okay, so a few things to unpack here. Like, again, this is a lot of stuff. She says that if Rick were still alive, he would have found his way by now. And it just really struck me hard that is something that, sorry, my computer keeps going off, that it's probably a theme that we'll see around Beth. Like, if she's been alive this whole time, why would she not have made her way back? You could say the same thing about Rick, and that's what Michonne does say about Rick. But I think it'll, just like Rick is alive and trying to get back, but he had given up, and so that's important too. Maybe something similar will have happened with Beth, where she just kind of gave up and couldn't get back to them right then. Okay, and we're gonna come back to that in a minute, because there's a lot more to discuss about Rick's mentality here. But also, we see the same pattern here that we saw with Rick last week, and I talked about this from the first episode, and that we've seen with Daryl a lot, where they have their first aim, and then they give it up, and they change their mind, and changing their mind is what leads them to their original aim. So with Rick, like I said last week, he was trying to get away, but he gave up and decided to stay inside the CRM and just kind of cooperate with them for the time being. But it was his cooperation, that led him to be face-to-face with Michonne. The same thing happened here. She gave up her look for Rick. She didn't think she was going to find him anymore. And moving back with Nat toward Alexandria is when she actually found him. So that theme is still there, and it's really, really interesting. And I think we're going to see the same thing with Daryl finding Beth. The other thing I thought was interesting, and I really don't know what the point of doing this is, but I'm sure it was intentional, is that right before they saw Rick's helicopter, her and Nat were traveling on the road, and Nat told Michonne that they were pretty close to being within radio range of Alexandria. Now, I'm not sure how far that is. They could still be, 100 miles away. It just depends on how far the range of the walkie is. So I'm not saying they were 2 miles from Alexandria. I mean, they were probably a lot farther than that. But they really did go out of their way to tell us that they were drawing close to Alexandria. So I was surprised to learn that, and that when Rick's helicopter went down, he was at least relatively close to Alexandria when that happened. And I think he must have known that. But they didn't give us that information in the first episode. So I just thought that was really interesting, and I have no idea where they're going with that. I mean, obviously, Rick and Michonne got picked up and taken back to the CRM, so it's not like they were ever close enough to go to Alexandria. But I almost wonder if at some point someone from Alexandria is going to find that helicopter wreck or something like that, Rick, when he met her, told her to give him her walkie and her diary and his boots, like to get rid of anything that would give away who they were. So maybe he left them there. I'm assuming he did. I don't know that he could have taken them back unless he had a place to hide them. But if they did leave them there, bury them or something, put them under a bush, then someone might find them at some point. So that's what I'm thinking it is. They were telling us that at least they were a lot closer to Alexandria than they had been prior to that, and that's intentional. They told us that for some reason. So it's just kind of an interesting note to keep in mind for the future. So then, of course, we have the reunion, which was really great and really sweet, and I absolutely loved it. Michonne kept saying, "I found you," which is a callback to 9:05 when the bridge blew up and Rick left. He said that too. I found them, about his family, and that's obviously a huge, probably the biggest theme on The Walking Dead, is finding the people that you care about and that you love, especially after being separated. I mean, that's the very first arc we saw with Rick in the first season, was him looking for Lori and Carl and then finding them. So, like I said, Nat is then shot, and that was very much a callback to Beth being shot by an unseen shooter. And in a lot of ways, just seeing that, knowing that he is a Beth proxy, and then seeing him get shot this way, it's almost proof, or I guess I shouldn't say proof, but it reinforces the idea that Dawn is not the one that shot her, because that would have been obvious, So it's an unseen shooter that nobody saw coming, and unfortunately, he dies there. And honestly, Michonne kind of leans over him in the same way that Daryl leaned over Beth in the hallway. So even there's that. But before he actually dies, Nat says something that's really interesting, I thought. He says, because Michonne, right before he got shot, was trying to tell Nat that Rick isn't actually with the CRM, like he's not one of them, and their mentality. But when Nat is shot, he says, "Is it him? Can you tell?" And Michonne says, "Yes, I can tell." And then he says, "Okay, well then, what I said is true. You can still believe, and believe a little longer." They kind of reinforce that arc. But my point is, I think that this is something that will probably, again, be said about Beth a lot as well, because we've seen symbolism around her, that has to do with the CRM, and they are clearly villains, but about her being with a group of villains or possibly with a toxic group. And I think people will ask, okay, are we sure that we can still trust her? It's been a long time. Is she a villain? Is she not? I mean, I think that's a theme that we're going to see around her, but ultimately, of course, she won't be. And I've had people ask me about this. Well, what if she shows up and she's actually evil? Like, we don't want that to happen. We love her character, and we want her and Daryl to get together. And it's never worried me too much, but I think seeing what's going on here with Rick is going very much to be something similar to what will happen with Beth. She may be with a villainous group, but that doesn't mean she's actually one of them. And we actually saw that reinforced a lot here, because Natty and Bailey, they were with a group that was not evil, but they were toxic. And when they decided to leave and go with Michonne, a whole bunch of other people left with them as well. Unfortunately, most of them were killed by the chlorine gas. And then, of course, Rick is with this group, the CRM, who is not a good group. And so I think it's going to be something like that, and that's why we've seen that kind of symbolism, but it doesn't mean that Beth is outright going to be a villain when we find her, but there might be people that are unsure or doubt, where she stands. Of course, Rick puts the gun on Michonne and takes her in as though she's a hostage, tells her not to let on who she is, or even that she's strong and a leader, and that he'll find her, when things are safe. And then we see her smile. And again, this was the clip that was leaked, so I saw it before, but this smile we've seen it at least 3 times before, this goofy little smile. The first time we saw it, not on Michonne, I mean, we've seen it with 3 other characters, was with Herschel in 408 is what I meant, which is unfortunately right before he's killed, but when Rick is giving his speech, remember, Herschel smiles. Then we see it with Beth when she almost gets out of Grady, and she doesn't. They take her back in, but Noah gets away, and she smiles. And then we see it with Rick, the scene that they showed us at the end of the flagship show where he had almost gotten away from the CRM, but they found him and took him back, and that's when he threw his bag onto the ship that Michonne would eventually find. And he did the smile, and now she's doing the smile. So what I'm seeing, I guess maybe not quite as much with Herschel, although it's similar, is that at least with Rick and Michonne and Beth, we see them smile as they're heading back into captivity, and specifically to the CRM, especially if Grady was affiliated with the CRM, which we believe they were, then they were all heading back into captivity, but it's like they have hope of getting out now. And so they do this really knowing smile, like, okay, maybe you got me now, but I'm going to get you, kind of a thing. And it's really kind of cool. So it is a callback to Beth at Grady. And in a way, it kind of reinforces that Grady was probably part of the CRM, because we've, seen this with both Rick and Michonne as they're heading into captivity with the CRM. Now, like I said, it's a little bit different with Herschel, but at the time, Herschel actually was a captive to the governor. And even though, unfortunately, he died very soon after that, I think that whole sequence, I've always said that the whole sequence was a foreshadow. For a while, I said it was a foreshadow of Grady, because Michonne and Herschel were 2 hostages, and at Grady you had Beth and Carol being 2 hostages. And I still think that holds true, that it was a foreshadow of Grady, but with Grady being a foreshadow of the CRM and the bigger arc of the CRM, I think in a lot of ways that happening with Herschel and Michonne in 408 was also a foreshadow of the greater arc with the CRM. But, Herschel, unfortunately, was sacrificed there, and we often talk about Beth as a sacrifice, the main difference being that, no, Herschel is not coming back. And we do know that because of what we saw. We saw his body. We saw that he lost his head. I mean, there's no way to come back from that, but that was not what we saw with Beth. We did not see her get buried. We did not see what happened to her body. I actually had a couple of people comment on my YouTube video last week who are obviously not TDers. They liked my analysis, and then I got a few comments that were like, whoa, what are you talking about? Why would Beth be alive? I'm like, okay, welcome to the Team Delusional fandom. So yeah, anyway, just to be clear, we did not see her get buried. There's still a lot of people in the fandom that think that the burial that we saw at the beginning of 509 was Beth's, and it was not. It was Tyrese's. They showed us Tyrese getting buried at the beginning, and then again at the end. It's the exact same shot, so people can go back and check that if you want. Anyway, so I'm just trying to illustrate the similarities here with the smiles. So then I totally thought that was going to be the end, and we wouldn't get much of Rick and Michonne together until next episode, but I was happy to be wrong. We did get a little bit of them at the end. Michonne tells the CRM that her name is Dana. Now, we have thought for a long, long time that when Beth returns, she might be using a fake name, and that will be harder. That'll make it harder for them to realize who she is or that it's her because, if they were to hear her over the radio or something and she's using a different name, then that's going to be harder to pinpoint her. So anyway, we don't know that for sure. It's still just a theory, but it seems like we've seen people do that enough, and it's during arcs that are entangled with her symbolism, so we've kind of thought that will be the case. So I thought that was interesting to see Michonne doing that. And just like Rick told her to, she makes up a story about who she is and where she's come from. And she ends up being given a CRM jacket with the orange stripes on the sleeves. So she's probably going to end up doing the same thing Rick's been doing, which we do see in the trailer for the next episode is true. She'll be, someone who's killing walkers just like him, at least for the first 6 years until she can gain citizenship, right? And, the biggest thing that this made me think of, which is really interesting, is that back at Alexandria, when they first got there, when Deanna and everybody was still alive, her and Rick were made constables, Michonne and Rick, I mean, and they were both given jackets that were like cop jackets. And this made me think of that because now they're doing the same thing and they both have the same jacket. So anyway, that's just to say that we always thought that the two of them being made constables by Deanna showed that they would eventually be the leadership at Alexandria, and that was true, and they were. I mean, clearly, they both became the leaders at Alexandria eventually once Deanna died. But I also think now that was a foreshadow of the CRM, and it is a foreshadow of the two of them, what we're seeing now, the two of them becoming workers for the CRM in the same capacity, but I'm going to take it a step further and say it also foreshadows the two of them becoming the leaders of the CRM next, once the war happens and, whatever else they're going to go over. I think Rick and Michonne, again, just like they led Alexandria, they'll end up leading the CRM. So it's just kind of a cool thing to see, and there's a lot of symmetry there with what we saw in season 5. Then we see the two of them meet up secretly to make out, which made me smile. I have no objections at all. But this is when she realizes about his hand, that he no longer has a hand. And he tells her that he basically tells her that he stopped trying to get home, which does clearly disturb her at first. But he says something really interesting here that was another callback to Beth. He says, "They had me trapped. They don't anymore." And okay, I could analyze that on about 8 different levels. First of all, the most obvious thing is that it's a callback to what Beth said to Noah. She said, "We're not trapped." In other words, we can get out. So you can see, and we need to remember this because I know that we've pointed to when other people talk about being trapped before and say, we basically just say it's a callback to that line Beth had at Grady. But really, we need to recognize it as a pattern here because when they say trapped, it means that mentally, the character is not willing to try and escape. They are being held hostage by someone or by an organization, and they are not going to try to escape. When they say we are not trapped, then they're willing to try and escape. So when Rick says they had me trapped, it's not a physical thing. It's not a literal thing like I was chained to a radiator. He's saying that his mentality, they had him trapped psychologically into thinking he couldn't get away anymore. Okay, and he says they don't have me trapped anymore, so he's now going to try and get away with Michonne, so that has changed. But I thought that was really, really interesting, and we need to recognize that as a pattern so that when they use the word trapped, we can always kind of interpret what they mean and what will probably happen because of it. I really, really wanted her to tell him about RJ. He still does not know about RJ, and I'm not sure exactly why they decided to wait on that. I'm kind of thinking that maybe she'll tell him at some point, and I think he'll know before the end of, this opening season of The Ones Who Live. And maybe if he at some point, waffles and goes back to maybe we shouldn't try to escape, then she'll tell him about RJ and you have a son you have never met and everything. But I really, really want him to know about RJ. That's really going to rock his world to find out about RJ. So I'm excited for him to learn that. The next big thing that jumped out at me about this part where the two of them are talking is that Michonne suggests that they need to stop the CRM. So not just escape, but she doesn't like it that the CRM is killing people. Neither of them do. And she says, can we stop them? And he says, no, because if we try, we're never going to get home. So I think that's really, really significant. I mean, Rick is all gung-ho about escaping with Michonne now, which is good, but he is not interested in actually taking on the CRM. Now, we do believe there's going to be a war with the CRM, so obviously that's going to change at some point. And the most obvious thing would be that Michonne will spur him to do the right thing and try to take down the CRM and the bad things that they're doing. But, then we have Jadis enter the picture, and I'm kind of going to go out of order a little bit here, but Jadis makes a threat against Alexandria, which it sounds like she's made before. And she says that if Rick and Michonne try to escape, she's going to make sure everyone they love dies. So she's basically saying if they even try to escape, she's going to make sure the CRM attacks Alexandria and kills everyone. And obviously that's going to be a big problem for them. They love everyone at Alexandria. They're going to want to protect them, and that's where their kids are. So this is something they're going to have to figure out, right? And I don't know. To me, it's almost a death knell for Jadis, because the only way really to keep that from happening, she told Rick that she would not put it on the books. Like, she's not going to tell the CRM that he knows Michonne and is married to her, and that's, obviously would be a big deal. But the only way then to keep her from doing anything to Alexandria is going to be to kill her or to convince her to switch sides and come with them. So it's going to be one or the other. Anyway, but the point is that I'm trying to make, I guess, is that Rick is not interested in taking down the CRM, and because of Alexandria being in danger, I mean, Michonne very well may go along with that if there's, a chance that they can just escape for now and get back to their kids without anybody being in danger. So I'm just kind of thinking, as soon as Rick said that, no, we can't take on the CRM, we'll never get home, I went, okay, so he's not interested in taking on the CRM in a fight. That means somebody else is going to have to show up to spur them to revolution against the CRM. And I 100% think that's going to be Beth. And if we return to Nat, the sequence at the end where he died, remember it was his, missiles or whatever they were that took down Rick's helicopter. And he was angry at the CRM for having killed his friends. And I 100% think that is going to be a very broad way to describe Beth's arc when she returns. If you see Rick's helicopter as kind of a small symbol, like I talked about a synecdoche before, right? A small symbol of the greater CRM, and Nat is a proxy for Beth, then we have him taking down the helicopter, and I think Beth is going to be the one. I mean, I think everybody will be involved in it. It's going to be a big war. All of the characters, I think they're going to bring characters from The World Beyond and from Fear the Walking Dead. Morgan's going to come back, Dwight and Sherry. I mean, I think it's going to be everybody involved in the CRM war, and it's going to be epic. And clearly Rick is going to be leading it at some point. But I think that it's going to be Beth that makes the difference somehow to actually bring them down. And that's kind of what we're seeing the symbolism and the foreshadow for here. So I really liked that. And I thought that was really, really interesting. So then we see someone who sees Michonne on camera, and we don't see their face. And I knew it was going to be Jadis. I was going, well, it's either going to be Jadis or Beth, and I really don't think we're going to see Beth here. So sure enough, it was Jadis. And I pretty much talked about everything she said already. She does tell Rick that they have a long-standing deal, which we had not heard about before. But, again, if they try to escape, she's going to basically kill Alexandria. I thought it was a fun callback that she said, yes, 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 you've heard lots of language from me. So that was kind of funny. Yeah, I think that's most of it, because that was the end of the episode. In the after portion, the inside the episode, I only wrote down a couple of things. Gimple did say that Andy and Denai helped write the reunion scene. That actually I do believe. So I've talked before about how sometimes the actors say that they helped write a scene, and I'm not entirely sure I believe them, only because, not that they don't have the capacity to, or that they're trying to lie through their teeth to us or anything like that, but when there's symbolism that goes along with Gimple's symbolism, I just don't believe that he didn't have that symbolism planned a long time ago. But that doesn't mean that he doesn't let the actors chime in on how to manifest that symbolism in the scene in some way. So I think it's both. I think that what they're saying is true, but it sometimes comes across to the audience like they came up with this storyline, and I don't think they did. I mean, in this case, it would be a matter of Gimple already had this planned out. He knew that Rick was going to be in the CRM. He knew that Michonne was going to go find him. He knew they were going to have a reunion, but he let Andy and Denai help him write the scene as it would actually play out, which is super cool. They actually got to, put the scene together with him. And Gimple was just talking about how they were planning the scene and writing the scene a year ago. And now they get, Andy and Denai get to embody the characters in the scene that they actually wrote. And so that was really fun. And that's super cool. But one thing Denai said about Michonne is she said Michonne's belief and her faith paid off and she found Rick. And, Beth was the one who always was all about the faith. And I think it's going to be a matter of Daryl having to take on some faith and his faith will pay off and he'll eventually find Beth again. The only other thing I wrote down is that Gimple said Jadis was never worried about Rick escaping until now. And I think I was just thinking that that's more of whatever their deal was. She didn't really worry about him trying to escape because she was hanging something over his head. And what's interesting is that he was still trying to escape. So I think she was underestimating him there. But now that she's seen Michonne, she is truly worried that they will try to escape together. And this is the first time she's been worried enough about that to go talk to Rick about it. We did see her drinking alcohol. We always relate alcohol to Beth, but that's kind of a small deal. So yeah, that is pretty much what I have. And then, of course, it cuts off and we can't wait for the next episode. But I really, really liked this episode. We did see some callbacks and I loved the reunion. I loved everything about it. And I'm really, really excited to see where it goes next. So yeah, tell me in the comments what you guys thought about it. What was your favorite thing about this episode? And I will get some more of your asks answered for this week. All right. Bye.